Good morning, guys. Today is March 26th, and so in following with the guide, today we're doing 1 Samuel and we're finishing up chapter 17. We did chapter 17 from 32 until the end of 58, right? And this is a really good chapter because yesterday we learned that David arrives on the battlefield being obedient to his father, and he overhears first what Goliath is saying to them, and then second, he overhears the guys discussing what the reward would be to the person that goes after this giant. So it opens up with David going to Saul being like, "Don't worry about this Philistine." He said, "I will go fight him." So remember, he's like this young kid, right? Again, like ruddy faced. Kid, and that's what Goliath called him. So that's why I'm using that term right now. But the bottom line was he understood who God was. And I'm gonna keep going with the chapter. So now he goes to Saul, and Saul is looking at him like, you're just a kid. Like, what is it that you can actually do to fight this? And something that when David was given his account of what he had accomplished, and this is in verse 36. He says, I have done this both to lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. The Lord, who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear, will rescue me from this Philistine. So first and foremost, if you look at it, it's like two great armies, but this one great man, Goliath, stood between them, and it caused everybody to just sit there. I think the Philistines got comfortable because they knew nobody could beat him, and the Israelites got scared because they couldn't beat him, but they allowed him to speak curses over them daily. They allowed him to just, so that kind of set in. But David came in and heard it once, and he discerned, like, wait, this is not acceptable. Like, throw me in. And it wasn't one of those things because he was confident of who he was. He was confident of who he was in who he served. So he knew that he was, I'm going to say, like the son of a king, a heavenly king, the Lord, and that he had a purpose, and that with God, that purpose could be fulfilled. So there was no fear in him, like upon hearing these things, right? And so we see Saul, tries to put him in his armor, and it wasn't something that David was used to. So it was one of those things. Remember, Saul is a man that's about more about appearance and order than about actually doing things and like seeking God and to allow God to lead him. He's more into appearance, and that shows again in this thing. But David realized that armor that Saul was trying to give him was more of a hindrance than anything else because he wasn't used to it. And it was one of those things where, like, I believe in being equipped. Like, sometimes God will take you into new seasons, but it should be equipped with something that, feels like something that you can run and accomplish what you need to accomplish in it, not just look the part, but actually do whatever it is that God is telling you to do. Oh, that just spoke a word to me. So thank you, Jesus. Okay, okay, okay. I mean, I had to laugh at myself real quick with that one, right? So it shows that David, he went and he picked up five smooth stones, and he was armed with only the shepherd's staff and the sling, and he started across to fight the Philistine, right? So it's almost like everybody had just been allowed to like sit and be paralyzed in fear, and David just came across one time, heard something, and was like, no, I already know what God could do, and if God could do that, he definitely could do this, and I'm believing him for it. So he prepared himself in a way that he understood and that made sense to him, right? So it was one of those things when Goliath sees David running across, he was like, "You think I'm a dog that you coming at me with a stick?" So it was like one of those things. And then I think he was the one who called him like a ruddy face. Um, when he called him like a ruddy faced boy, that's what he called him. And so he said, and he cursed David by the names of his gods. And I think that's so powerful because I know we hear scriptures all the time that say our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? But I think sometimes we get so caught up in flesh and blood that we miss the spirit behind things, right? So he said right now that he cursed David by the names of his God. And he said that as David replied to the Philistine, and this is verse 45, he says, "You come to me with the sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heavens of armies, the God of armies of Israel, whom you have devoured. Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head." And one of the things that he was saying a little bit further down is he referred to the God in Israel as the Lord who rescues his people. And that's just the thing, like when you take the time to read the Bible today, because he didn't put a D in that, he said rescue. So it's like that God that rescued them back then is the same God that rescues us today. And I think that's just one of the gems, like of actually sitting down and looking at like historical accounts that people actually put down in a word for us today. Because remember, there's life, there's something for us to get out of this today, not just to stand amazed at what David accomplished, but to get excited about the things that God has given us to actually go out and do, and to know that that same God that David is referring to and we're looking at his story as the same God that's writing our story. So I just pray that that's something that hits you and gets you excited to dig in and to see that we have access to a lot more than I think we could visually put our eyes on, right? And so it said that as he approached Goliath, he ran, and it wasn't that he was this great warrior from birth, because I think that's what Saul had kind of brought up to David. Like Goliath is somebody who has been trained from a child up until the man that you see today when you're not trained at all. And that was when David actually began to give his resume like, no, actually, I'm the one for the job, and this is why. But it was almost like Goliath probably prepared himself in a way that he had been trained to fight. And he believed in his gods. And it's like the same way he believed in his gods who had given him victory up until that moment. It's like he didn't even know how to defend himself properly from a man named David that was coming at him, because all it took was for David to put one of those smooth stones in his sling, and he hit Goliath right in the middle of his forehead. And that one stone is what sank, and it said it sank into his forehead. So I guess it was almost like 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 if somebody got shot in their forehead, like it would be one of those things that it would be something that would be so detrimental. And at that time it was. And David did everything that he said that he was going to do. He took Goliath's sword, because remember, he didn't have a sword. And remember, Goliath's sword was described earlier in chapter 17. That's why it pays to like dig in and get the whole picture, right? And that's what he used to cut his head off, and he walked away with his head. So at that, it was like now the Philistines became afraid, and now Israel was encouraged to now go and fight and to overtake them and to begin to kill them, which means that Israel always had the power to defeat them. But they allowed the words of the enemy to be what came between them and what God sent them there to do. And it took somebody who had a relationship with God to show up and be like, wait, you're saying this, but my God says that. I don't understand. Let's run. Like, I got you, right? And I think that's so critical for every walk of life, for regardless of what it is, when sometimes somebody try to tell you something and you be like, but that's not what God says. And I think sometimes it's really easy to put your eyes on what's actually going on around you and not believing and hearing God for what He has said. So that's definitely something that I feel like at any time we could all take advantage of and actually get into it, because there's so many Goliaths today that God calls us as his body, his bride, that he is coming back for. How about that? Let that be something that gets you excited. Thank you, Jesus. But it's like while we're here, there's so many things for us to accomplish, and we can do it with him. And so it was one of those things where now, after David had done this, Saul was like, whose son is he? Right? And it was one of those things because remember, David had already been sent to Saul to soothe him with his harp. So it wasn't so much that Saul didn't know David, it was that Saul didn't know all of David. He just knew him as a young person who came and had the ability to soothe his spirit when his spirit was tormented. So he saw him as a harp player, but now today David showed up as a warrior that just did something so great and so unthinkable that it's like, now wait, hold on, who's his father? And so it's not that Saul is meeting him for the first time or interacting with him for the first time, but for the first time he's seeing David in a greater light, in a greater way. And so it actually ends with David coming in and actually having Goliath's head, and he was brought to Saul. And that's when Saul was like, who is your father? And David replied, his name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem. And that's how that chapter ends, because I just think a lot of times, like in this text, it's like we see things moving from one to the next. And it's almost like for every time something else is coming and God is moving, God is always present, and he can always be found amongst his people. But it's almost like we already know that David has been chosen. We already know that David is now allowed to be in Saul's presence and actually bring him comfort to the point where they developed a relationship. But now he's seeing David in a much greater light. But it's like because Saul is not somebody who is having his appropriate relationship with God, he's missing who David really is. But he knows that he's this young man that whom he does love like a son because of the things that he's been able to accomplish. So this day, it became even greater to the extent that now Saul actually wants to know more about this kid that's already been there serving him, to ask him who is his father. So I just think that this reading, it was worth it for me to actually go ahead and read it the way it was written. And instead of trying to jump ahead to stay on track, I'm trusting I'm still going to stay on track as we continue to go. But chapter 17 was definitely a chapter that was just so full. So I pray that you guys have enjoyed this chapter and are continuing to dig in, because this is my first meal of the day. I will say that. Right. So be blessed and have a good day.